So welcome, Mart Rovers of Interprom. It's great to have you with us today. Thanks so much for taking the time out to share some of your insights, experience and knowledge on Midday Mentors. Mark, can I possibly ask you to introduce yourself and let everybody know a little bit about yourself and Interprom?
Thank you, Estelle, for having me. It's a pleasure and it's an honor. Yes, my name is Mart Rovers. I work for Interprom. It's a US-based consulting company, coaching, and we also do training. Work a lot with APMG on many exams, actually. Definitely for ISO for 20,000, what we're going to talk about, and also 27,001 for security, change management, business relation management, just to mention a few. It's a pleasure. Thank you, Estelle.
Wonderful. And I think the reason that we've gathered here today is because I noticed that you've been sharing some top tips and giving out some free advice on LinkedIn. And I thought, well, what a great opportunity for you to share that even further with people. So I wondered if you wouldn't mind me asking you a few bits and pieces on those top tips that you've shared, Mart.
I did, yes, thank you, and thanks for noticing. Indeed, for ISO IEC 20,000, a new version was released in 2018, and in essence, every organization that is certified, and you're looking at about 6,000 or so globally, they have till September next year, 2021, to migrate to the new version. So it's definitely something that lots of organizations are in the middle of. So I thought, why not give them a little bit of help with a few minor tips? And thank you for allowing me to elaborate on that. Thank you.
Well, I think the first tip was the elevated focus on services requires the service owners to be more knowledgeable and engaged. So can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Yes, actually, that's the one that got the most reactions. Lots of views, lots of likes, that one. So the new version of 20,000, it makes it no secret that what is expected from the service owner. In previous versions, you always had to read in between the lines sometimes what is expected. With the new version, it's almost very straightforward. In particular, as an example, there's more ways of doing this, but as an example, if you do a simple search on the words SMS and the services, it shows up a couple dozen times, meaning as in, well, that's you, service owner. In other words, you have to be involved. You can expect questions, and it's something that you may not have been aware of in the past, but this is a pretty cut and dry, as in. So this new version has this increased focus on services, and therefore the service owners need to be much more engaged in the whole management of services. Something you will not find in other frameworks and standards, by the way. It's often this mystery as far as what do service owners actually do. But yeah, definitely in the new version makes it very clear.
Excellent. And well, I guess that moves us straight on to your second tip, Mark. What were you sharing with us there?
Yes, that had to do with the engagement of leadership, executives in the organization. There's a lot more focus on strategic aspects. I actually literally just got off of a coaching session with a customer where we talked about, for example, service portfolio management, which is a new process in the standard, which is by nature a strategic process, which requires senior executive involvement, engagement. So yes, it's one thing to appoint somebody in the organization and say you're the process owner, but guess where the action happens? That's at the leadership level. So it's then also expected that it's somewhat a little bit more formalized as far as how we make these strategic decisions. And if you think about portfolio, for example, service portfolio management, you're talking about investments in, what is it we want to be good at, what makes us unique, what are the services not only today, but also that we need in 2 or 3 years from now, because it will take a little bit to ramp up these services. So definitely at the strategic levels where a lot of information resides or decisions are being made, and not some of them maybe even informal. The new version actually looks at as in maybe a little bit more needs to be formalized. at these levels. So senior executives definitely also then need to be more engaged in the management of the service management system per the new version of the standard. So that's just one example of where the emphasis on strategic aspects has increased, and therefore also the involvement of leadership needs to come with that, needs to go with that.
So the third tip, and you will excuse me referring to my notes, but the third tip is about new practices that can be combined with existing processes. So can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yes, so the new version has additional practices compared to the old version. There were 14 in the previous version, it's 20 now. So the number has gone up, but the good news is that, for example, there is a requirement to do more in the asset management space. In the guidance provided in the -2 document of the standard, it also says, hey, you don't need to have a full-blown process for this. In other words, if you're doing asset management, just identify where you're doing asset management and then incorporate those practices into, let's say, existing processes, procedure documents. So in other words, it's not required that you now need additional process owners, more documentation, just integrate it with what you already have in processes such as service design and transition. Another one is knowledge management, an area that the standard is looking for as well. Knowledge is being managed in many parts of the organization already. Just take credit for it and document it in existing processes, procedures, such as incident management, for example, where people need to have access to knowledge. Same for problem management. Just describe what you're doing from a knowledge management perspective, and don't go down this path of I need a full-blown process document, procedure document, process owner. I mean, if you already have asset management and knowledge management and have process owners for it and documentation, then of course you build on that. But if you don't, just look at what you're doing and incorporate it where you can in existing practices.
Excellent, Mart. Thank you. And I can see that that would save time by not needing any more processes, procedures, and process owners. Right. So tip 4 was about the management of the 4 types of risks. You said a more formalized approach is needed. What do you mean by that?
Indeed, the old version actually already was looking for the management of these 4 risks: organizational risk, information security risks, service continuity risks, and project risks. However, the new edition is emphasizing a lot more on the management of risks. If I use, for example, the organizational risks as an example, there's a whole clause dedicated to it as far as the management of risks to services, the service management system. So more rigor is actually expected. A reference is made to, for example, ISO 31000 and the risk management standard. It's a hint and actually to imply as in, this cannot be taken too lightly. This cannot be an ad hoc effort. What is your approach to assess risks? What is your approach to mitigate these organizational risks to your services and your service management system? So, in other words, one more example of more engagement that is needed from service owners, more engagement that is needed from leadership. Think of the first 2 tips. And tighten it up a bit as far as how you manage these risks, because the last thing you want is that you're getting derailed by organizational risks that are not being identified, let alone being assessed or mitigated.
Well, clearly less risks would be a good thing for sure. So the last tip was the control of other parties should be coordinated at higher management levels than before.
Indeed, this is just one more example where the executive leadership needs to be more engaged than in the past. Since the new version of the standard is very, very specific on the whole sourcing decisions that are going on in organizations, as in what is it that we do ourselves, what is it that we no longer want to do ourselves, or it goes even at length when it's about describing which services do we outsource, which parts of our services do we outsource, which processes or components, process components do we outsource. It's very detailed if you think about it. So it actually says this whole sourcing should not be taken too lightly. And then when you make these decisions, then also take care of the consequences to these decisions. In other words, what does it mean for your organization? How do you collaborate with that third party, which could be external to your organization? They're calling it the external supplier, or internal to your organization, internal suppliers. So the sourcing, which is happening as we speak, think of cloud sourcing, is something else where you see lots of dependencies that need to be addressed to do this the right way. So these are strategic decisions that should not be taken too lightly, with all the consequences behind it. So sourcing decisions definitely are made at a leadership level. So what is the leadership involvement and how are these decisions being made? I'm just thinking, for example, there is always a risk involved when you make these decisions. Is that being addressed? And where are the consequences of those risks? What does it mean for our organization or the organization that we're working with? So it needs to happen at the right level, but also the consequences, how it trickles down the whole organization, need to be addressed to make sure that these relationships with these other parties, so to speak, can be successful. So it should not be taken too lightly.
Fantastic, Mart. Well, they sound like some really, really good. They look small, but they are some big tips. And I know that you have got a huge amount of advice and experience, where you've dealt with clients, and I'm sure you've got a lot of case studies in your head. Are there any final words you want to share with everybody before we close, Mart?
Most certainly. Thank you again for the opportunity, Estelle. And you said it right. These changes, they may seem minor, however, they can have a huge impact on the organization. If you think, and I'm thinking mainly organizationally, so don't take it too lightly as far as, what the standard is looking for. And I'm thinking of the involvement of senior leadership, more involvement of service owners. We'll be happy to chat with somebody has questions. You can find me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email. I'll be happy to elaborate. So thank you, Estelle.
That's great. And Mart, it's always a very generous offer from you. You've done some fabulous webinars with us and given some great advice. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.